Good afternoon, everybody. This is your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author with his intrepid sidekick, Maddie. We are still at Smith Lake. Tomorrow we should be departing. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. It's a wandering author here reminding you that we're all the authors of our own lives. So we're going to continue our discussion of civilizational collapse by looking at what happened to the Bronze Age. So for a long time, in like the mid-20th century, most historians would have said that there was basically a bunch of ancient sea Vikings from the north that kind of invaded during the end of the Bronze Age that kind of caused it. We say that because many Egyptian rulers detailed some battles with these invaders, including Ramses III, who's a pharaoh that he basically left inscriptions that said that he alone stopped these invasions, who had toppled many civilizations before him. Now, we do know that some of what he said wasn't true, because he claimed that certain cities were destroyed when the archaeological evidence indicates otherwise. Now, and then in other areas around the Mediterranean, such as like Hattusa, which is the capital of the Hittite Empire, there were areas where like only the public buildings were destroyed, but private residences were left alone, which is more indicative of something like a political revolution or a civil war, rather than like basically people were targeting institutions of power. It'd be like if all of our houses like these were left alone, but the post office and the courthouse were destroyed. That's probably politically motivated, right? Now, historically speaking, there is some merit to the invasion theory and the sea people. It does seem that from U.S. history with like the Barbary pirates when Thomas Jefferson had to go fight them, to the actual Viking Age in Europe from like the 700s to the mid-1100s CE, that periodic outbreaks of large-scale migrations and like basically Vikings and pirates is not like necessarily abnormal, but as we go more into what actually happened, I think you'll probably see that these things could be symptoms of a much larger cause, like drought and famine. Basically, people were forced on the move at the end of the Bronze Age because the Earth's climate was shifting, or at least that seems to be part of the reason why there were so many large migratory movements at the time. Still, there's a lot that we can learn by looking at dogs. I'm joking. Anyways, when examining the historical record, it's always important to consider motive and context. Really, that's important when you're talking to anybody in your life. For example, Ramses III may have been writing these inscriptions to like impress some people that, you know, he needed to garner the favor of at the time, or he might have been doing like the Bronze Age equivalent of campaigning, trying to shore up his support amongst like his population, basically amongst the Egyptians. Now, there is another perspective which I think is kind of relevant with all the talk about the economy today, which is that around this time there were most civilizations were trading for alloys of tin and copper to make bronze. That's why it's called the Bronze Age. But certain civilizations, like the Hittite Empire, began to discover iron. Iron's not necessarily a better metal when used to make weapons, but it's much more abundant. So it made it where large-scale arming of populations was much more affordable, and not just large palace economies could support, you know, actual militaries. Also, this could have disrupted trade amongst a lot of like different rivals, and that could have collapsed their economies and then made people migrate. I mean, imagine if we saw hundreds of thousands of people migrating today. Even if it didn't topple our civilization, it would probably have a pretty drastic impact, right? Also, with iron being more abundant, it was kind of an encouragement in some ways to go to war. If it's cheaper to go to war, then there's not as much of a disincentive against it, right? Now, piracy wasn't uncommon, like I said, from the Pontic pirates with King Mithridates, the actual Viking Age. But some of these pirates may have also been domestically motivated because like their existing industries were gone. Maybe something we could see with automation if people aren't able to continue supporting themselves. But at the end of the day, there is real evidence that at the end of the Bronze Age, there were large nomadic hordes that came from the north and at least fought with like the Egyptians and the major empires and did wreak some major havoc at the time. Now, was that the exact cause of collapse? No, I believe it was more symptomatic. Basically other disruptions, and we'll go into these more in our next episode about collapse. These other systemic disruptions started to make it where people could not continue existing in the same ways that they had been for a long time. These generational disruptions occur periodically throughout history. You may have heard of the fourth turning before. It kind of talks about the evolution of generational archetypes, which this isn't exactly the same thing, but as times were changing due to a conflux of new technologies disrupting existing industries, and then weather patterns similar to the Great Depression, where like the Dust Bowl, there was a perfect storm, so to speak, which is a term that I think is overused, but that's truly what I believe caused it. Now, in our own time, there are definitely a lot of lines that we can draw to compare these two topics, right? So one is economic hardship. As inflation is getting worse, people are more likely to do things that they'll regret whenever they're desperate, including acts of violence. If you have large-scale economic hardship where whole populations of people can't support their families, then you'd be surprised at what they do, I'm sure. Climate-induced migrations could happen today, as, I mean, it's been hotter than I ever remember it being around here, and I'm not even that far towards the equator. If it gets so hot that people can't survive somewhere, which it might eventually in certain places, or it may have, like with the Dust Bowl, things change. Also, we've got to look at the effect of technological disruptions. Obviously, changing from from bronze to iron did have a huge impact on the economies back then. That's why we call it the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. But we rarely consider what that looked like for the average person. Now, a more contemporary example, something that you might see today, would be like the effect of automation on jobs and industries, right? So as these people are put out of business or lose work because computers are doing jobs that humans used to be doing, there might be more people that need support or that are unable to support themselves at the very least. And those could definitely have some